for attending today's event. Bit of a quick introduction on myself and in TekRek. So TekRek is a boutique tech recruitment firm that specializes in recruiting software engineering, IT, and data positions. So the whole purpose of today's event is essentially to connect individuals, share stories, and invite discussion. So everyone has their own journey, and sometimes it's hard to know what turn to take. There's so much information out there that it's hard to sort through. And that's why we've got tonight's panelists. We have three people who've had three very different careers, and they're going to share their insights on how to approach your own journey. So these great panelists will help us along the way. The event tonight will last roughly 1 hour and will be in the format of a panel discussion. So I will start by asking the panelists a variety of questions. This should last about 30 to 40 minutes. And then afterwards, I'll open up to the floor, the audience, to ask questions, which will last another 20 minutes or so. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. First and foremost, make sure to fill out your profile. So that includes your profile, bio, LinkedIn profile. This is so that others can like network and meet with you afterwards. So this button can be found in the top right. It's your profile picture button. You should be able to put your information in there and save that. Afterwards, if you do have any questions, I do want this, the whole point of doing a panel is we want it to be as inclusive as possible, right? And get everyone involved. So there is a questions tab on the right side. So I'll say, hey everyone, ask your questions here. So ask them as you have them, and then at the end of the event, we'll start to go through all the questions. And then there's also the chat tab. So I invite this as just so everybody can stay connected. Hey everyone, welcome to the event. This is just so everybody can stay connected and stay engaged. Yeah, so stay engaged. So if you want to ask any questions, put them in the question box. If you just want to have general discussion, feel free to do that. And if you like what people are saying, we've got some emojis on the right. Share some love there, as it's a little intimidating sometimes to be on stage and have everybody out in front of you. So those are the housekeeping. And then obviously the most important one is like, let's have fun and enjoy. It's a safe space for everyone to learn and grow. So don't be shy to ask questions. That's what this is all about. There's truly no dumb questions. I've asked the dumbest questions possible. So you definitely can't beat me. So for tonight's panelists, I'll invite them on stage here in a second. We have Frank, he's an engineering director at VoiceFlow. We have Desmond, he's a principal engineer at Amazon. And then we have Dave, he's a staff engineer at SurveyMonkey. So please can I have a virtual round of applause for everyone as I bring them on stage. Okay, welcome everybody. How's everybody doing tonight?
Hello.
We're just chatting backstage. Everybody's got very different weather. Frank's in Seattle, it's raining. Desmond's in Vancouver, it's beautiful. Dave, Ottawa, how is it?
Ottawa has had beautiful weather all week, and it's going to continue all through next week.
Okay, unreal.
It's
Same as
weird
us in
for
Toronto.
this time of year.
We'll take it. We'll take it. Okay, well, first and foremost, I want to get everybody introduced. So starting with Dave, I'll ask you to give an introduction of yourself and then also maybe jump through. This is going to be a bit elongated, but what key milestones or achievements in your career have kind of helped you along the way? So a bit of a longer introduction and any key
Okay.
milestones that you've got.
I guess I have a couple of minutes then to
Yeah.
talk.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Anyways, hi, I'm Dave Isaacs. Yeah, I'm a software staff engineer at SurveyMonkey. Been at SurveyMonkey for about 4 years. And I'd say for most of my career, I've been driven by the desire to learn new things, mostly because I'm a self-taught programmer. I went to university for mechanical engineering. I have a master's in aerodynamics. So I do have a STEM background, but not programming. I've only taken one computer course in my lifetime. And in that, we learned Pascal, which you don't use very often. And so since I'm self-taught, I take those opportunities to learn on the job. So my first job was actually at a mechanical engineering firm, but we were writing engineering diagnostic software, like engine diagnostic software. And that was a great opportunity for me to do some on-the-job education. You learn from your mistakes, and we made lots of mistakes because we were all a bunch of mechanical engineers trying to write software. But I decided that if I was going to be writing software for my full-time career, I needed to work for actual software companies. So I reached out into a network of people that I knew, and I was able to get a position at Cognos, That was a local business intelligence software company. And this was a bit of a risk for me because here was a mechanical engineer working alongside actual comp sci graduates. So, kick in the imposter syndrome and everything like that. But it was also the opportunity to learn some best practices instead of having to discover them the hard way. Now, from there, I went to a company called Entrust. I was always interested in computer security, and Entrust was a local computer security and encryption company. And I stayed there for 16 years. And I would say, in retrospect, that was at least 4 years too long because I'd hit a period of stagnation where I wasn't learning anything new. And I didn't realize this at first until I kind of keyed in thinking, I'm a bit restless and I'm doing more things I'm doing more work like side project stuff like that just to keep myself entertained. So when I figured this out, I jumped over to Shopify, where that was an avalanche of new technologies and challenges. It was a great time for about 4 years, but I also then took the opportunity to learn about wireless mesh networking while doing contracts for the Defense Research Development Canada. Again, that was an entirely new field to me. I never imagined my work would take me spelunking through the Linux kernel code. That was a lot of fun. So now I'm at SurveyMonkey, still seeking to learn new things, but I'm also concentrating on the softer skills as well, leadership, mentoring, not to mention like business practices. These have always been important, but as I've gone up in my career, these have become part of my job. So yeah, that is, in a nutshell, that's been my journey.
Thank you very much. And I know no easy tasks. All I asked was, hey, what are your career highlights as the first question. So I appreciate Dave. Very interesting and very unique background, right? Not coming from computer science. So very cool. Um, Next, Frank, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and some of your kind of key highlights.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Frank Gu. I'm currently working as the Director of Engineering at VoiceFlow. VoiceFlow is a Toronto-based startup company specializing in a design, build, deployment platform for chatbots. So, how did I get to where I am today? Well, very similar to Dave's story, I did not start out as a software engineer. My university training, strictly speaking, is in electrical engineering. I wanted to go into mechanical engineering. But one key experience back in the day, during university times, really helped me understand what I was good at and also what I like to do. And that was at the University of Toronto, the solar car program, Blue Sky Solar Racing. I ran that program between 2015 to 2017. Before then, I was kind of just doing individual contributor work, and then made my way up to the managing director there, where I was basically thrust onto the stage, and I had to put on many, many, many hats and really just hit the ground running. Um, some would call it trauma. I call it character building. So it was very difficult, because there's a lot of things they never teach you in school, right? Conflict resolution, how to manage people, how to deal with supplier relationships, and it went far beyond just simple engineering. In fact, the engineering part was the easy side of the problem. So that's when I got like a first taste of what management really looked like and how to really manage groups of people. I didn't think too much of it. So I graduated with an electrical engineering degree, went into do some prototyping work for some tech consultancies and boutique consultancies. So this would be full stack, as you would have the namesake. And I mean full stack, going from low level PCB design and circuitry simulations all the way to deploying these IoT solutions on a cloud basis. So, I got the full front row seat for how technologies are able to interact with each other. And then this was also around the same time, 2017, 2018, of the ML craze. So everyone was just trying to like jam ML into whatever they can find. So companies and different institutions had almost infinite budget. So as long as you had a project that related to ML, you could jump on the bandwagon and really just play around with the technology. Did we build something that was useful? No, but there was a lot of fun and a lot of learning along the way. And basically, I didn't really, at this point, I was still kind of exploring. And you'll hear that I'm kind of like wandering in my explanation, because this is the point of university and post university life for me at first, just kind of understanding what I was good at and what I really like to do. And I finally found my calling with VoiceFlow. I've been with the company for 4.5 years, started out as another full stack engineer, but I quickly realized that it was super important to specialize. If you were the same as like other developers just working on full stack development, it is really difficult to make an impact. Number one. And number two is that there will be times where you get put into specific segments of work, if you will, where I don't really have much of a choice. And I can't really say like I would want to work on a project or not, because I would be treated as the same as any other software engineer out there. Because as a full stack engineer, you are replaceable by definition, right? If you don't want to do the work, someone else will. However, one big area that most startup companies lack in is infrastructure engineering, DevOps, but more with an infrastructure focus. So that was the vertical that I decided to jump into. And I became an infrastructure engineer, and still being employee number one in the company, engineer number one, that gives me a lot of leeway with VoiceFlow. But at the same time, because infrastructure is such a neglected aspect, me being able to specialize in this area gave me a lot of both, like, I guess, educational leverage, if you will, in the company, because every other startup is really focused on how can we ship code faster by increasing the number of devs and improving the dev cycle. But with VoiceFlow, I approach this problem from the infrastructure side. If you can have a 10%, 20% improvement across the board for every single dev, right, that is going to compound much more than just adding new developers. So I climbed the ranks, built out a team, became infrastructure team lead, and I saw my workload gradually shift from IC work to 70% IC work, 30% management work, until at one point, both the company and I came to a realization, well, if I am overseeing all of the infrastructure, I see how all the services interact with each other. I know where the bottlenecks are in the dev process, in the tech process, and also in like our whole like code. And at that point, the company was also kind of missing a key person to coordinate amongst the teams. So I was in a really good position, and I basically proposed myself to the company, hey guys, perhaps it's time that we get a director of engineering at the company, and I like to self-nominate. And after a bunch of discussions with the company, identifying the key limitations of not having such a role, that's when we all came to a consensus. Yes, this role is necessary. And yes, it is, you are the right fit for this role because of context and expertise, and the fact that I already see everything and I'm already doing most of the job of coordinating between teams. Just previously, before I got promoted, it would be coordination more so for like deployments, whatnot. And then after promotion, I will be directing all of the work across the team. So that is the long, winding path to how I got to my current position today.
That is good, and that's almost the title of a Beatles song, isn't it? The long and winding road. Anyways, but very, very interesting. Honestly, I like the self nomination. That's a great way to get promoted. That's how I got promoted to director for myself as well. I created TekRek, and I had to get promoted to director. Right? I wasn't going to be a consultant. But anyways, really interesting. Thanks for that. And now we've got Desmond, and I think on everyone's mind, the question is, will we have three panelists without a comp sci background?
Yeah,
Desmond, can you answer that question?
half, two and a half.
Okay,
So,
okay,
so why
explain.
is that? Is because originally I was doing biochem, but I come to the realization CS is the way to go on year 4. So that's why I count as half. So I did graduate with CS, but it was a tough start. I think so it's very similar to moving into computer from another field. I graduated 2029. That's like the last whole big recession, right? And with no internship, zero experience, because I only switched to computer science at year 4. So my basically my first company is a local startup. It's actually a really good start. They are small, but I got a really good mentor kind of starting the company, doing some online accounting related stuff. It's basically the only one of two company that give me an interview. I did get offer on both. I just pick one. But that's the beginning, right? Like, and one thing led to the other. When Amazon came here, I joined Amazon, and for the last 11 years, I have been working in Amazon in Vancouver, across many teams, so across 9 teams, rotating around across 2 organizations. So first half is actually accounting. Started doing a bunch of ops, on call and stuff, and that leads to me developing visibility tooling, and then visibility tooling is so slow, so that lead me building NoSQL storage within our organization from scratch. And then it ended up working really well. And people was like, well, this is good for visibility. Can we use it for actual reporting of real data instead of just ops? And then that led to me building what's called reconciliation. So financial reconciliation between various part of Amazon to make sure nothing is broken. It's a typical enterprise big data messaging type of situation. I think it's really also a long winding path, but I think what Frank said echoes with me is you're kind of chasing a problem, and then the next thing become the biggest problem, and at some point maybe people is the biggest problem, so you go to the management, but technically it's the same thing, right? So it's just continuing to go and evolve. I love startup. My first company is startup. I think it's a good career, and we can talk a bit about it later. But I think Amazon been treating me well. So every time I'm like, yeah, I gotta go. They sort of give me something that keep me here, both financially but also
Mm,
project-wise. And so I decided I'm just gonna be a startup within Amazon and basically run my whole career like a startup company. I got my investors, my customers, my boss, all this partner, and I propose project. And I'm very proud. That's the one thing I'm most proud about, aside from those financial and I guess the later 5 years in the recruiting system, just building their recruiting platform. Aside from the technical and business achievement, is the fact that starting my career, the first 3.5 years, all of the project are things I initiated, like come up with a
mm,
proposal, get it approved, and just I'm the only resource, right? As D1. At
mm,
some point, people starting to help me as D2. At some point, I'm leading the team to build reconciliation, right? And then now as
mm.
a principal, looking at the organization of like 16, no, I guess 7, 8 teams, building recruiting. And I'm also very passionate about recruiting. Obviously, I'm half of a recruiter because I'm the recruiter engineer, right?
Right.
So that is a little bit about me and my journey to now.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. And yeah, okay, so we've got, as Frank said, he's half an engineer. So we've got, well, it's a full engineer, but half a computer science engineer. Oh man, I hope this is recorded. People are gonna hunt me down after. But thanks for sharing, Desmond. Again, what I'm seeing is kind of a trend is kind of putting your career into your own hands and taking initiative, right? Finding out things and saying, hey, self-proposing a promotion or saying, hey, like let's try this or that. And Dave, kind of realizing, okay, I've been in this company, I've stagnated, I need to move on. That's really kind of taking ownership of your own career. And I think that's a great way to kind of segue into the start of the event. So yeah, thank you very much, Desmond. I'm going to stick with Desmond, and I'm going to ask you kind of obviously compensation aside, because compensation is one thing, um, but only focusing on career development. Like, what are the benefits and drawbacks of working at like a FAANG company? Do you feel that it's necessary, or is there a specific stage people should work there? Yeah.
Um, I think this is always going to be a hotly debated topic, right? And the actual company itself, the domain is more important than the general sort of direction, as always. But for me, the value in having a, I guess, really large, organized, FANG type of company in your resume and in your career is important. And the best time to sort of have it is relatively early. We can talk a bit more about timing, but the reason is because in the early career, it's very important to have a balance of your drive and your structure, right? And this
Mm,
is also the time where if you all you do is startup, sometimes you have the problem of not knowing whether what you are doing is the best course of action here. What are the paths other people have taken, what are the best practices, some of the company who were startups, right? And they grow into millions of people doing something right. What is the path they take? And that thoroughness of rigor in the technology, which sometimes is unnecessary, but sometimes just going through that exercise is almost like an academic exercise where we have all this debate, sometimes not as efficient for sure, but being a junior, you don't care about the efficiency. You're here to learn, right? So knowing all the other, what are the people thinking about, what are the principles the seniors they're thinking of, give you that breadth of I wouldn't say do it right, but here is how people do it formally, right? Like use that word. Here's the heavy way to get things done. And the second one is more of branding. So obviously chasing title not encouraged, but in the early career, title does define a person's choice, right? And as a startup of one person, like my philosophy, we want to hoard choices, right? So I want all the choices, and then I'll make them. So being, in Amazon, I think just immediately from my old startup, LinkedIn engagements, right? Recruiter reach out, they just skyrocket, which actually earned me the right to move on, which I think at some point in your career, you should consider moving on. I'm just still here because things have been working well, but I wouldn't hesitate if, there's some reason to move. So yes, important somewhere in your career, but not better or worse in any sense.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And that makes sense from a recruiter's perspective. It's kind of that badge of approval, like, hey, if Amazon hired this person, they've got an extensive interview process, they must be pretty smart, right? So you can reach out to them knowing that they're likely to be pretty good. So I think it's hard to say because, like you said, you get different things at different times of your journey, right? If you join later in your career or earlier in your career, so it's hard to say. It's going to be different for everyone. Thanks for sharing. And then Frank. So now to take kind of a different perspective, like what are some of the benefits and drawbacks of working at a startup? Big question, but yeah, take a bite out of it.
Yeah, sure. I can go on forever for this one, but
Okay.
let me just double click on Desmond's point about like learning and following proper due process and learning from like people who have treaded this path before, right? I think one of the big things about working for startup is that you don't have guardrails. You don't have training wheels. You are like, just released to the wild and you have to run because if you don't, something's going to catch up to you or you're going to fall behind. It's one or the other. So it is really important to become very self-directed, very self-motivated, and you need to really like what you're doing, and you need to really enjoy the learning process, because as Desmond mentioned, right, like there are mistakes that bigger companies have gone through before, and there's a reason why they do things the way they do it. Now, obviously, there's a lot of organizational tech debt from all the years. We don't want to inherit that, but it almost requires you to both understand why the other companies are doing it this way and also separate out what is it that they want to optimize but cannot optimize versus what they have already optimized and we should just follow suit, right? So like, for example, today, the process that I have installed in VoiceFlow is actually patterned after Facebook's engineering practices, specifically around dark launching, around development, production parity. And it's really important. And our whole like the DevOps process is patterned after Google's SRE mentality. Do we take everything after it? Not really, but we do take a lot of inspiration because these are the road that's already been treaded and mistakes that you shouldn't, or I would not recommend repeating because they're expensive and painful, and we already know what the outcomes look like. But on the other hand, for startups, it's also this playground that allows you to make a lot of these mistakes and allows you to really learn from these mistakes. So I think in my interview process as well, one of the big things that is almost, I would say, like at this point for me, it's almost a science. Like the most predictable indicator or a reliable indicator to predict if someone's going to succeed at VoiceFlow or in a startup environment or not is how they deal with ambiguity. And I think a couple of years ago, Google actually mentioned something along those lines in their interview, but then they abandoned that process because it was too quirky. But for us, like we use a series of like take-home projects as well as just a very unstructured interview process to see how people deal with ambiguity because the startup environment is ambiguous. So going back to my earlier point about no training wheels, no processes, you have to figure this out for yourself, whether you like it or not. And for better or for worse, you make choices and you live up to the consequences of those choices. There will be ones that are really good, and then you'll feel really proud, and like it will save you a lot of time. You will make choices that are really poor, and it will cost you, your team, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of man
Mm,
hours, or perhaps your job. But that is the risk that you have to take in a startup environment. So I wouldn't, a lot of people describe it as like a polar opposite from a more
mm,
corporate environment or more well structured. And I think it's really the question of whether or not one, it's not really whether one is better or another or than the other or like more advantageous, but
mm,
rather how well do you deal with the lack of structure, and how well do you want to be self-directed versus have someone kind of coach you through and give you the mentorship to put you on a track that you know is going
mm,
to be successful.
mm. That's really interesting. And it like I can imagine at different stages of your career, you might need different things, right? Someone like yourself, you seem very curious. So I'm sure at VoiceFlow it was a perfect fit because it's ambiguous and you like to explore and learn. For me, I'd probably need some training wheels a little bit, I think, in the beginning, a little bit of direction. So different strokes. Cool, very cool. Thanks for sharing. And then just kind of moving over to Dave. Um, I guess most people looking for fast career growth are looking for fast growth companies. Now, are there questions in the interview process that you can ask that help shed light on a company's growth trajectory? Like, have you had experience doing that? Oops, sorry, Dave, you're muted there. Yeah, all good.
Thank you for catching that. Okay, I probably should start off by saying that I'm a little bit wary of the super fast growing companies. They're great for your advancement. There's no
Yeah.
denial there. But sometimes growing too fast, a company can lose touch with itself, and the growing pains can be traumatic. Now, this can provide a lot of opportunity, but that's not for everybody.
Hmm.
Now, to figure out whether a company is growing fast, well, you can just ask them. If you're talking to a recruiter, the recruiter knows. I mean, that's part of their job. Like they're going to know, this time next year compared to this time this year, how many more employees are you going to get? Are you hiring
Hmm.
hand over foot? You can even just look at the job postings to see how fast they're hiring. Doubling in size every year, depending on the size of the company. Like if you're 500 this year and
Hmm.
you'll be 1,000 next year and 2,000 the year after that, that can be a little bit too fast, in my opinion. I like, a
Hmm.
little bit of a more measured growth. Now empirically, I would say my favorite size of company is between the 250 to 1,000 mark because I just know that's when I've enjoyed working for companies the most.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just how it's turned out for me. Also, if you're looking for like advancements or things that may disrupt the company, you want to talk about their funding or their plans to IPO. These are details that can significantly change the culture of a company. And
Hmm.
when, I'm not saying that these are good or bad things, but they can change the way a company operates in a way that maybe you won't enjoy it as much anymore as you used to.
Hmm.
Also, if you're trying to find out about, the company and its work style and their trajectory, also reach out to your network. You might know somebody who works there, or somebody who knows somebody.
Hmm.
It's when you're looking at a company, it's great to just get some inside opinions for them. Before joining companies, I've reached out on LinkedIn to some people that I didn't actually know, but I said, "Hey, you work for so and so company. What's it like?"
Hmm.
And I got some pretty honest answers.
Hmm. I think that's a great call. Like I always, I talk to people every day and they're like, oh, they check out Glassdoor. I think Glassdoor is very important. It is just like one opinion in a moment at time. So it could be really good. It could be bad. Also could have been forced by the CEO who was standing over them to be like, write this Glassdoor review, 5 out of 5. So I think reaching out to people, that's a unique one that probably people don't do a whole lot. I think that would be really good. And so those would be some of the questions that you would ask as well. Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for sharing, Dave. Um, And then, sorry, did you ask, did we get into the specifics, or was there any other types of questions you would ask, or was that kind of the full gambit there?
I didn't really have any specifics. You kind of have to feel it out when you're talking to the companies,
Okay.
get an idea of where they're going. I'm sometimes wary of companies that contact me on a holiday or a weekend because I'm thinking, why are you working on a weekend? You shouldn't have to do that. There's times when you need to do that, but if that's part of your everyday job, that's you got a problem there.
It's because they have a fast paced and driven culture. That's why, Dave. No, I'm kidding. That's what the blanket term I get a lot for sometimes for long work hours. But hey, thank you very much for sharing. And then Frank, moving on to kind of yourself, just wondering if you could give some advice to senior software engineers out there. What specific advice would you give them who like senior engineers looking to accelerate their career?
All right, there we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So basically, I think the most important thing, first of all, is to understand where you are in your company or organization's context. Are you a more individual contributor focused person, or do you want to go down the management track? Because I feel like different companies obviously have very different promotion processes and career ladders, but that's usually for VoiceFlow at least, once you hit senior, that's when you get to a point where you can make a choice. Do you want to become a engineering manager, or do you want to become a specialist and get promoted into like a staff position in the future? And that basically dictates where you will be in like the next couple of years at VoiceFlow in my company. So it's very specific to particular companies. And I think for most senior software engineers, and this is a pattern I see very often, is that everyone tries to be really, really good at what they do. And that's really like, I think that's, as a strategy, there's nothing wrong with it. And there are certain, we call them like anchor engineers, if you will, that like they're specialists in particular areas of technologies. And, they continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in their area to become a god, if you will, like a programming god. But once you get to the senior software engineer level, right, like the assumption for management, from my perspective, is that you should be very, very good at what you do already. So being better is an incremental gain. However, if you have other skills that make you indisposable, or other skills that make you unique amongst the other engineers, those are the particular areas that will start to get my attention. So, for example, if you specialize in one vertical that nobody else in the company is able to specialize in, or they just don't have the context, right? That's a really good area for you to continue, whether you're becoming management or staff, because there is only one of you in the company. And I think the biggest advice I would give for most seniors is that, like, contrary to what I think most people tell you, don't be a generalist. If you're a generalist and you want to continue moving up the ranks, like, you are replaceable, as bad as that sounds. And that, like, why would you as a generalist be more deserving of a particular promotion or increase in comp or increase in role as compared to somebody else if there's no differentiator, right? Like, from a manager's perspective, like, holding all things equal, it's almost like if two people are almost similar in capability, I have to toss a coin. And that's a terrible way to think about it, but to some degree it is true. So have distinguishing characteristics, whether it's you're really good at mentorship, verticals you specialize in, or just in general, have a skill set that nobody else has. And I think that would be a really good way, both to further your career and also to make sure that, like, you continue to maintain impact at a particular company.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have like something that is uniquely you, right? And doesn't necessarily have to be like you only look after one specific part of the application or something, because then the thought, like, that is obviously a great way, but then maybe that becomes outdated and there's something new. So like, what would you say to people that, like, oh, well, I don't want to choose one thing, and then what happens if 3 years from now it is outdated? Like, what would you say to someone if they said that?
Trust yourself. Use your
Okay.
best judgment. Everything that, if you've done your due diligence, you've done your research, you want to bet your horse on a particular technology. For me, it
Mm,
was containers, containerization, Docker, Kubernetes ecosystem, right? Like,
mm,
um, if that was when I entered the scene, I had the choice of going with virtual machines and down the VMware route versus containers. And at the time, like the two were still dueling it out in 2016, 2015. I chose the
mm,
container route. And I just doubled down on it and kept absorbing more information from the industry to make sure that the trends are still going the right way. But I
mm.
think you can't know at any given moment whether or not your choices are going to be good or bad. You can only say that with a degree of confidence, I've done my due diligence and I just have to
Mm,
trust myself and just push myself forward.
mm. Yeah, exactly. No one knows, right? You just have to kind of stay on it and stay and it like you said, if you're involved in the community and you're learning and growing, always kind of interested in information, you're going to have that feedback loop where eventually you'll see, okay, it's actually shifting to the VMware or to the VM side, virtual machine side, or to containerization where it did. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. And then kind of bopping over to Dave. Just this question, the theme is more focused on continuous learning. And I guess this is kind of a great question to ask off the back of Frank's answer there. But how important is continuous learning, and what strategies do you recommend for staying up to date with the latest technologies and trends?
Oh, well, I already mentioned that I love learning on the job
Yeah.
type of thing. So I'm always looking for opportunities at work where I can get to my hands on some experience that I haven't had before. And it doesn't
Mm,
always have to be hands-on work. I mean, your company is a great resource. There's a lot of engineering technical activity going on in any given
mm,
company. Even if you're not working on a team, I troll through all the Slack channels at work from time to time just to see what they're up to.
mm,
Find out what challenges that they're dealing with. Maybe I can lend a hand. Maybe they're dealing with challenges that I've run into that I said, oh, they could probably help me.
mm,
So leveraging the other people, the other activities in your company is a great way to actually get some learning.
mm,
And like Frank said, if there's something that you're really, really keen and interested on, latch onto that and see if you can get your company to let you do this project. Or
mm,
if there's no project like that, they probably offer some sort of online learning package, like
mm,
Udemy or Riley LinkedIn Learning. They're they're not the best way to learn something, but it's a great way to actually get your feet wet, find out
mm,
whether this is something that you want to double down into, let you get the nuances, and find it if you know if that's what you want to learn about.
mm,
Also, talking to other people, going to meetups, talking to people, chatting online, anything like that. It's just a way of just learning what's going on out there and how
mm,
to learn about it. Now, sometimes, like I said, leverage your company, but if your employee is letting you down,
mm,
then you start doing these projects on the side.
mm,
And if you find yourself doing a lot of projects on the side, that's great for your knowledge, stuff like that. That might be an indication that it's time to maybe look somewhere else
mm,
for work, because your company is not really living up to your expectations. That's what I found out when I was in that working for that one job where I was at for 16 years. I had a timeline. I put a timeline of when I'd learned different technologies, and I saw this hole in it where I hadn't learned anything new except for what I had introduced myself doing side
mm,
projects. And that's what kind of gave me the kick in the pants saying, I think I should be, looking
mm.
elsewhere.
That's a great one to have anyways, to take the step back. You have to be able to reflect and have yeah, I guess the time to sit back and be like, wow, okay, I actually haven't learned much unless I've implemented it. So that's a great point. Thanks for sharing. And then moving over to yourself, Desmond. I don't know. I wanted to ask you this question because I feel like you are exceptional at networking. I don't know why, but can you share your experiences around networking, building relationships within the tech industry, and how has it helped your career?
I think thank you, Paul, for that. I think for me, it's really more about if you do it right, because engineering community, some of us folk have a natural reluctance somehow, right? There may be this misconception that like engineering is on this spectrum, sales is on the other one, and
Mm,
somehow that's like not really a core thing you do. But in fact, if you are working anywhere, in fact, if you are in any career, I would conjecture, then you're actually in sales,
Mm,
especially engineers, right? Like, so I'm not selling some product to a customer outside, but like there's the word internal customers, and
mm,
you may be like, I'm junior, I don't even have that. Well, every CR you push, you're trying to sell some contribution to whoever's reviewing the CR, right? And then like they agree
mm,
with your idea, they like your approach. Every design discussion you're in, technology choices, approach, requirement. So the ability to sell and use a variety of ways to influence and convey idea, start from the most basic of the like junior new grads, and become especially important as you become a principal, maybe a DE,
mm,
right? Like you are really at that point a mid-level executive. So many of your thing is not going to be things you personally do. I would love to do more coding, but many of my project is me converging and getting these teams to line up with me, everybody focusing on the same thing, with the same vision and proceed, right? And I may do some coding, but I'm just one person. So
mm,
this is extremely important, both for your personal development, to network, to get the point across. In work, maybe there's some higher stake, you want to get something done, but outside of the work, take the opportunity to get to know people when there isn't a lot of interest, a lot of pressure, conflict of
mm,
interest, complex politics.
mm,
Make friend and learn technology, learn the trend. Like in this one, exchanging information with Frank and Dave and you.
mm,
It's extremely important for you to build your eyes and ears to make those big decisions about like what technology I'm going to invest in, right? What is my core competency? And the funny thing is, I'm actually more like a generalist, so I'm thinking about how do I reconcile what I am with what Frank said. And the interesting is my core competency is actually in a way sales. In the company,
mm.
I've been the person they pull in. No matter what topic it is, if they just been arguing for like a week, Desmond comes in 2 meetings later. Hopefully, we have an output, right? And I gather information right there and do
Mm,
it. And I do so because it's not just my wisdom, it's all the people I network and learn from. And
mm,
sometimes I even like you invite them into my discussions. I pull in experts. I hear other people's example. So by
mm,
networking, you are leading multiple lives at the same time. You're getting that experience. You are also taking the road you didn't personally take and getting that
mm,
benefit, right? So extremely important. And also, if you're switching jobs, it's much better to be a passive candidate than actively being recruited. It's just
mm,
easier for you to set up, right? And
mm.
networking is a big part of it. So back to you.
That's a great answer. And I can imagine, Desmond, you get in the room and a few hours later, everybody has a consensus on an answer.
Hopefully,
Got it.
hopefully.
Yeah. No, that's good. And honestly, network's huge. Genuinely, from like a recruiter's perspective, of course, being an agency recruiter, I think there we definitely have our place. But I think you would absolutely want to tap up your network first and going, meeting with people, doing in-person events, and just kind of building relationships is really important. And I'm finding like people want to chat and connect and all of these things. So definitely putting yourself out there is really helpful. So thanks for sharing. Dave, back to yourself. In terms of looking at balancing work and personal development, um, do you mind sharing kind of, obviously engineers have often demanding workloads. How do you balance your day-to-day responsibilities with like personal development and side projects that can also contribute to career growth?
It's an interesting question. Nowadays, I progressed pretty far in my career, and I try to get most of my technical fulfillment at work. I have less
Mm,
side projects going on. If I have a lot of side projects going on, as I mentioned in my last question, probably means I'm not satisfied with my work at work.
mm,
So I prefer to detach from work after hours, pursue my hobbies and stuff like that. Now, I wasn't always like that. When I
mm,
was younger, I often threw myself completely into my job. I had a lot of side projects, and I'd say that was a bit of a detriment to my work life balance and to my mental health overall. And ironically, I'd say my career advancements accelerated when I stopped doing
mm,
this. And I'm not going to say that, technology is not important or anything like that, but I probably got my nose out of my keyboard and started paying more attention to the people around me and the networks. It comes down to Desmond's networking thing. I am, instead of concentrating what's on in front of me, I am interfacing with the people in other teams all over the company and stuff like that. So I'm sort of broadening my impact. And when you impact a lot of different people across the company, your name gets out there, your face gets out there, and people recognize you a bit more easily. That's probably how I started advancing. Whereas before, when I was younger, I was thinking work, work, work all the time, do side projects all the time. But I was doing that all for myself. It was kind of entertaining, but it was in a way a difference between working hard and working smart. Working hard, I was learning a lot, but if you're not out there actually talking to other people about the work that you're doing, nobody's hearing about it.
Yeah, again, excellent point. Gotta be your own best cheerleader sometimes, right? Interesting. Interesting that like you know, when you were doing too much, it was maybe a bit overwhelming and didn't get as far as you had hoped, and then took your foot off the gas a little. That's an interesting perspective. And then kind of the last question before we move into some of the questions in the chat there. So Frank, moving over to yourself. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but in your opinion, how did technical skills and soft skills like communication, leadership contribute to career growth, and which should engineers focus on more?
Yeah, it's I think that's a really interesting question for me because I've been asked this a lot. And the short answer is I don't really think they are two things that you have to think about or you should think about separately. They're two sides to the same coin. And kind of echoing both what Desmond and Dave said, right? Like you have to be your own cheerleader and you have to you have to be able to sell yourself. So the way I would describe it is like your technical skills, that's your hard backstop, right? Like that guarantees the lower bound of where your career will be. Because if you don't have, if you have really good technical skills and you do no selling, right? You could just be some tech guru that's like really deep in the weeds, being like part of a think tank or something like, and that's perfectly fine. And that guarantees like the lower bound of where your particular career is going to go. But where's the upper bound? Well, my philosophy and my view is that there is no upper bound because the upper bound is defined by how much you're able to sell yourself and how much you're able to project, right? And it's not necessarily just like projecting as in, oh yeah, like being a sleazy salesman and just trying to, say things that's not true about yourself, but rather the energy you give off, the confidence that you give off about how comfortable you are with a particular technology, the passion that you're able to get across, whether the screen or to other people. These are the soft skills that will make people feel like, wow, this person is reliable or this person has that energy. And we often kind of bundle everything together as like, yes, I like the vibe of this person. So I think there are two sides to the same coin and you can't have one without the other. If you have too much soft skills, if you will, and then you do a lot of the selling, but you lack in technical capability, one tech interview is all it takes and we'll be able to see right through you, right? At the same time, if you have really good technical skills, but you're unable to really sell yourself, then as people would say, you're selling yourself short, and it also kind of leads to a suboptimal outcome. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's like funny because like you need both, right? I think you can't if you have one or the other, your career will just take a different path. But if you have both to complement each other, I think obviously that's the easy answer that I took that. So no, thank you very much for sharing. So that's kind of are the prepared questions that I have here. So I'm now looking in the chat question group, and I see Frank, you've been on it. Awesome. You've been actually answering some of the questions as we've been going. So I'll start with the one that Wesley had answered, and then we'll jump on to some of the others because I don't know if there's any others. So anybody, if you have questions, we got about 10 minutes now. Please do ask all your questions, and we can try and get through them all. But I'll open it up. I guess I'll start, and we'll give everybody kind of a crack at this question, or a couple people. But Desmond, what are your thoughts on obtaining certifications or advanced degrees like master's, PhD for career growth? Are they
Okay.
essential, or can experience and skills alone suffice?
Got it. For us, a software development engineer, because there are scientist roles, right, to which they are
Mm,
essential and they give you strong start. And especially if you're a super strong academia with a area in an area that has like a lot of business value, you could
mm,
start your career in very high ranks. That aside, two cases where it's useful. Number one is if you are actually starting pretty low, like you don't have much, right? So then they are, they give you more opportunity, they show the effort. And for example, doing advanced degree gets you back to being a student, which opens you up for
mm,
internship. And in my thinking, the internship, and maybe if you're doing a master, then do one with a publication, right? Either one with
mm,
a big project or a publication. Don't do one that's just courses, because they are less useful for sure.
mm,
And they basically get you that extension to build up your first job. So in that
mm,
sense, low start, good. At the other extreme is if you actually want to do a startup, a technical based one, for example, and you kind of know what you want to get at, then going to the master or PhD using the school resources, right, spin it off, is actually one really good way to do more risky, technical research oriented startup
mm,
ventures instead of doing it by yourself or try to start
mm,
one from a company. But for that, you need to be very particular what project you're doing. You're less doing the degree, more doing your
mm,
project, just using degree as a platform. In the
mm,
middle, though, is where I find it to be less useful. Right? If you're already kind of having some experience doing pretty well in a company, would you like to stop completely and go do an advanced degree or get some certs? I say if you
mm,
love the tech, go do it. If you're completely being a business person, maybe work back, right? Do some reconnaissance first. That's my take.
mm.
Mhm.
No, that's a good point. And I agree with you there. I think there's a lot of great info you shared, but I think in terms of certifications and whatnot, it's some people are like, oh, I'm going to getting AWS certified or something. I think it's great because it allows you to go about learning in your own direction. But it's not like the employers that I work with. They're like, oh, I'm looking for someone with this exact certification or whatnot, right? So, but I think there's definitely pros and cons for sure. Okay, that was a great one. And Dave, anything, do you have any follow-ups to that or anything you want to add to that question?
I can add a bit from my own personal experience. Now, I have a master's.
Mm,
Now it's not in computer science. It didn't help me program, but I got a master's in mechanical engineering and aerodynamics, and it was
mm,
for my career, actually kind of useless and almost
mm,
detrimental. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I mean, I
mm,
loved doing my master's. I learned stuff. That's where actually I discovered that I really, really like programming is while
mm,
doing my master's because I had to write software to do all my data analysis for my wind tunnel experiments and stuff like that.
mm,
But when I got out and got a job, all I found is that I was 2, 3 years behind the people that I used to be peers with when
mm,
that started, and that kind of slowed me down. Or I was a few steps behind. Now I quickly, I was young, quickly managed to get through that hurdle, but it wasn't really a leg up in my career in any way, shape, or form. I
mm,
was sort of targeting, as Desmond put, that middle ground. I was an individual contributor. I wasn't doing anything really specific that needed that master's knowledge.
mm.
But then again, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I loved being a student. So it wasn't great for my career, but it was a lot of fun actually doing.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be kind of the balance of life, right? You got to enjoy things along the way. So I think that's good. And Frank, I found a question that I'm going to move to with yourself. So Adnan asked, how would you define a senior engineer and an intermediate engineer? What differentiates the two? And like, what steps should someone take? Should an intermediate engineer take to move into a more senior position?
Yeah, for sure. So the way that I see it is that intermediate engineers are at a position where they're mostly self-sufficient, right? You can like they'll be able to carry more complex projects, and then they can
Mm,
be people reviewing code, and like they're able to be, I guess, like code on their own without too much supervision. In VoiceFlow, just for everyone's context, we have juniors, and then, well, we go from interns to juniors, intermediate, senior, staff, and those are all the levels we
Mm,
have. We don't have like
mm,
7, 9 levels as other bigger mature companies do. And basically, the threshold between intermediate to senior is, are you able to execute a project end to end? And when I say
mm,
execute a project, I mean not just going through the technical development, but basically taking a product description, a product discussion, digesting it down to the work that's needed. And this work can be done by yourself or by another intermediate or even junior engineers. And are you able to then communicate the gaps, the technical gaps or problems back to the stakeholders and coordinate the entire project? So like, from me as a manager perspective, can I give you this project and say, hey, take care of it? And
mm,
you tell me the resources you need. And after a month or a week or something, the project gets done and it gets released. And I think that is the biggest differentiator. In
mm,
addition to that, I mean, there's also the mentorship aspect. At VoiceFlow, I think we have a really strong learning culture. So even intermediate engineers tend to mentor the juniors, and like they present a lot of really fun topics to share with others in the company. But for a senior engineer too, I would say mentorship should be something that's almost a requirement, because that's the only way that you'll be able to upskill your team. Right. Once you have a
mm.
group of senior engineers, you want them to transfer not just context about the company's operations, but more so like their experience, their knowledge to the intermediate, to the juniors. So over time, the team's talent density is trending upwards.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. And I'll move over to Desmond. What do you have any thoughts on that in terms of intermediate versus like how to get to senior and like how to classify them or whatnot?
I think Frank, what I agree with what Frank said already, right, is that essentially is the ability to deal with ambiguity. I think that's also, I forgot if David or Frank said that dealing with ambiguity. If you are being able to fully execute the entire project, you are senior. If you're
Mm,
intermediate, you're doing part of it, delivering services. If you are staff or PE, you're actually discovering new issue, right? So is that increasing breadth and scope and the level of responsibility
mm,
of your project. But what I will say is each promotion is not a natural progression. It's actually a
mm,
switch of role. So be aware of that, right? Like a lot of your fundamentally how you add value will change with each. So don't just continue being a really good level X and expect a promotion into level X plus one. So be aware. Yeah.
excellent. Thanks for sharing. And then everybody, I know we're getting close to 8 and Desmond has a hard stop at 8, which I guess is his 5 p.m. So we'll get through a couple more questions. But if you've got to go, Desmond, that's cool. You can kind of go anytime, all right?
Yes, I will just kind of drop off when I need to go. But thank you so much in advance and please continue. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Desmond. You take care. Um, one question. Yeah, a couple more questions to get through before we jump off. I guess I'll start with yourself, Dave. Someone that mentioned they're technical, but they don't know how to sell. You know, I guess that's like a great question. If you're technical and you're like, I want to actually learn how to sell myself or my ideas, do you have any thoughts or insights on that?
Hmm. Well, you have to like. What do you mean? What does it mean to sell yourself?
Mm,
I mean, that means you have to sort of promote yourself. You have to sort of be your own. I want to crudely put, brag about yourself or make sure that
mm,
you're noticed. Talk about the
mm,
things that you have been doing and the things that you want. If you don't talk about yourself and the things that you've done, and also talk about the things that you want to do,
mm,
people around you aren't going to know about it. Like I
mm,
can think of an example where there was a time at a job where they ended up hiring somebody for a job that I really wanted, and I went to my manager saying, I really wanted that job, and he said, "You never mentioned it. Like I didn't know," and I was about to, be angry, and then I realized he was right. I didn't sell myself into that position saying that this is something that I really, really want to do.
mm,
So it's all about talking about yourself and what you want or what you have done with other people.
mm. That's a
It's
great point.
also like getting your face out there. Like I take the opportunity wherever possible to, get up, speak in front of a crowd or something like
Mm.
that, which is something that terrifies a lot of people and used to terrify me as well. I took some public speaking courses and stuff like that and just practiced until, you know, it comes more naturally to me now. And that also, you know, you will be the person who, you know, people recognize. I remember you standing up in front of the company and giving a speech about X or Y or Z. And, you know, that's the way of getting yourself out there, your face out there, your name, and the stuff that you're working on, the stuff that's important to you.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then Frank, I'll kind of have the last question for yourself. Annie Rudd asked, we have another clarification question. How would you classify a senior engineer versus a staff engineer?
I think Desmond put that very succinctly, right? Like senior engineer, you are able to execute projects end to end. As a staff engineer, you're discovering new problems. You're identifying this is where the status quo is, and this is how we can be better. And this requires a huge amount of context. It requires a lot of experience, and it requires also a lot of knowledge in your particular domain. So I think, yeah, this ability to identify like this is where we're at, and this is where we could be, and this is how we can get there, right? Like that ability is the key differentiator between a senior versus staff engineer. Now, I do want to put a disclaimer, like this is how I distinguish them. It's not necessarily how other companies might do it. But I think, as Desmond kind of mentioned before, right, it's very key to understand that these are not linear progressions. You don't slowly climb up to the point where you're like a senior engineer and then one day you just kind of fade into a staff engineer, right? Like it's a step function. Like the moment that you are ready or the moment you start taking on these new types of projects, new responsibilities, new roles, that's when you really stepped into that position. And another point I also want to clarify here is that there is a distinction between when you're functioning on that staff engineer capacity versus when you actually get promoted. Typically, for VoiceFlow, we want to see that you're able to operate in that capacity for a couple months over the course of a couple projects. That's very heuristic based. There's no science or there's no like hard number we put on it. But we want to be able to see that you're operating at that capacity for a sustained period of time before we actually make the promotion. So I think kind of double clicking on Dave's point earlier about being proactive and being your own cheerleader and just also kind of demonstrating your own work. It's important if this is something that you as a senior engineer want to climb up to a staff engineer, right? Start doing these work, start finding projects, start finding the problems, and self-promote these projects. If your company allows you to have like 20% time for yourself, or you have space in your calendar to work on some of these things, right? Start doing it, because the worst case scenario, you learn a lot by doing this, right? Best case scenario, your manager recognizes that, hey, you're at this level where you're starting to discover net new problems and you can solve them. That is when the situation is ripe to have that discussion of should there be a promotion.
Right.
Can I add something there about so
Absolutely.
when I was promoted to staff engineer, or before I was promoted to staff engineer, my manager actually brought it to my attention saying, did you notice that you're actually working in the capacity of a staff engineer? And I was like, oh, cool, that's neat. But I wasn't a staff engineer, and I was wondering, how do I go, like, I'm not all the way there. How do I get the promotion? So what I did at my company is that I did a bit of a Dave Roadshow. I made one-on-one meetings with directors inside and outside of my department, other managers, program managers, even some salespeople and stuff like that, just to say, you know, what do you expect in a staff engineer, and what do I need to work on? Like, where do you not see that in me, or what is missing from me for me to make that extra step? And I learned a lot from doing that. And so then by the time I finished my Dave Roadshow, I talked to, you know, like half a dozen different people all with the company. And it gave me a pretty clear idea of what my road should be for the next few months so I could get that promotion in the next cycle.
Again, I love it. It's like taking it in, you know, your own initiative, reaching out, understanding. That's a great question. What about my work right now is not at a staff engineer level? I can see some people sweating, coming to come up with reasons, but I think that's great,
I'm lucky that to work for SurveyMonkey, we're all about feedback and
right?
surveying.
Yeah,
So,
truly, that's the company to be at. That's a great point.
That's
Okay.
also one of the ways to sell yourself, by basically acknowledging that I understand where I stand in the company, and basically figuring out, like, this is where I want to be. You tell me what's missing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it's brilliant. And then it gives you exposure to people in the business that maybe know you, maybe don't know you. I don't see a whole lot of negatives there. Obviously, you'd probably want to chat with your manager about it before you start booking in time with the with the director or VPs of the business, right? And then I think that's a wrap. It's just shortly after 8. We've answered a bunch of the questions. So kind of first and foremost, I want to thank you, the speakers, for very much for spending an hour and some change of your time tonight. Very great discussions here. I had a lot of fun, and I'm sure the rest of the people in the chat here did as well. And then a second thank you to all the attendees. Genuinely, these events, they don't run without you. So hopefully there was something that you took away from this. And if you do have any feedback, genuinely, I'm very open. Send me an email. It's riley.king@tekrek.io. Honestly, happy to hear any feedback, good and bad. We want to keep getting better every time we do this. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, I guess we're kind of signing off.
yeah, thank you. It was great
Hosting,
being here.
Riley.
And thanks for all the questions, the great questions from the audience.
Awesome. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Have a good one.